There was a man in doctor scrubs whose hands were trembling badly, a pregnant woman anxiously biting her fingernails, and a big man with broad shoulders shouting at a metal door, "Let me out of here!" And then my heart dropped, because there was a little girl sobbing in the corner with two messy black braids. It looked exactly like my little sister Gia. It had to be her. I dragged myself across the floor toward her and pulled her into my chest and hugged her tight and sobbed out, "Gia, Gia, I'm here. I'm right here. I'm gonna get us out." But then she looked up at me with brown eyes when Gia's were blue, and my heart sank because it wasn't Gia at all. I whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I thought you were my little sister." And her lip trembled, and she quietly said, "I want my mommy." I felt bad for her, but just sat back on the floor in shock, and that's when I noticed the smudgy purple flower Gia had drawn on the back of my hand that morning before I left for work. My heart hurt, because that flower meant Gia was waiting for me at home. So I decided right there that I was getting back to her no matter what. That's when a red countdown screen appeared high on the wall. 25 minutes. So here's the bad news. You've all been poisoned, and that clock you're staring at, that's how long you've got before it kills you. I gasped and started panicking for my life. But then he said, "The good news is there's an antidote hidden somewhere in this building." And I almost sighed a breath of relief, but the voice continued, "But don't get excited now, because there's only one antidote, so you all have to decide who walks out of here alive." I balled my hands into fists as I decided that I was getting out of here before the timer hit 0, but that's when I grabbed my head because the poison was eating away at my brain. That's when the big man gruffly said, "Listen up, I've got a wife and 2 kids at home, and I'm the only one putting food on the table, so that antidote's mine." My heart raced, because if he got the antidote first, Gia was losing her brother tonight, and I couldn't let that happen. The little girl pressed herself against my side and cried, "But I want my mommy. Where's my mommy?" Then the doctor jabbed his finger into the big man's chest. "You don't get to claim it just like that. Everyone in this room has somebody waiting for them." The big man shoved his hand off his chest. "I don't care. My kids need me home, and that's the end of it." The pregnant woman yelled back with her hand on her belly, "And what about my baby? You think your kids matter more than mine?" The big man clenched his fist and looked at both of them like he was deciding which one to deal with first. But the countdown had already dropped to 23 minutes, so if we didn't start looking for the antidote now, we were going to die here. So I got off the floor and got between them. "Knock it off. We need to find the antidote first, and we figure the rest out together." The big man took a step toward me and roughly asked, "Who died and made you boss?" My hand was sweating because he looked seconds away from punching me, but the doctor and pregnant woman knew my plan was their only shot at survival. So the doctor said, "He's right. We're wasting time." And the pregnant woman nodded. The big man's jaw tightened, furious that he didn't get his way, but I turned away from him because every second we stood here was a second closer to dying.
To remind you that 60% of sales on Amazon come from independent sellers, Jess from Planetary Design.
From him because every second we stood here was a second closer to dying. "Let's split up and check every room. We've got 21 minutes. We split up through the 4 doorways leading off the main room, and I ended up checking the storage closet with the doctor and the little girl. The doctor said, "Whoever did this wouldn't make this easy. Start tearing things open." But then he looked terrified as he struggled to open a jammed drawer because his hands were trembling badly. I walked over and opened it for him, and he muttered, "Thanks." We quietly searched next to each other, but my heart was pounding hard because every empty drawer was a minute of searching. We'd I'd never get back, so I talked to him to ease my nerves a bit. "Who do you have waiting for you at home?" He gripped the edge of the counter and his eyes filled with tears. "My fiancée. We're supposed to get married in 2 weeks." I told him I was sorry and asked him what she was like, and he let out a small laugh. "She's the love of my life. If I don't make it out of here, she's going to think I abandoned her at the altar and she's going to be crushed." A tear ran down his face. I can't do that to her. I felt so bad for them that for a second I wanted him to make it out so they could get married. And then he went back to searching with more urgency. "That's why I'm going to find the antidote. For her." That's when I felt a small tug on my shirt and looked down to see the little girl pointing up at the top shelves with tears in her eyes. "I can't reach those. Can you help me?" Her braids fell over her shoulders, and for a second I saw Gia standing in front of me asking me to grab cereal off the top shelf. So I told her, "Of course, come here," and I picked her up under her arms and lifted her up to the top shelf. She started pushing things around looking for the antidote, and her body was trembling from the poison, but she didn't say anything because she was trying to be brave. After a minute, she quietly asked, "Am I doing it right?" And I smiled. "You're doing perfect." But I looked over at the countdown, and it was already at 18 minutes, so we really needed to hurry up. That's when the big man stomped into the storage closet and started yanking drawers open with sweat running down his face, muttering, "Saturday, Saturday," and I didn't get why. Then the little girl gasped and clung to me. "He's scary. I don't like him." I quickly pulled her into my chest so she couldn't see him and quietly said, "You're okay. I'm not gonna let him hurt you." The big man looked at us and said, "Only one of us is walking out of here. Remember that." I got nervous because it was clear he was going to fight for the antidote, and then he stomped off into another room. The little girl looked up at me with tears in her eyes, and her voice cracked when she asked, "So I won't see my mommy?" My throat closed up because I didn't know how to answer her, but I pulled her back into my chest and told her, "Don't listen to him. You're gonna see your mommy. We just need to find the medicine." She nodded, but I didn't even believe what I said. I set her back down on the floor, and we got back to searching. I grabbed a small container from one of the lower shelves, and before I could open it, a wave of dizziness hit me so hard I had to grab the shelf to keep from falling. I gulped anxiously because the poison was getting worse, but we weren't getting close to finding the antidote. The little girl saw me struggling and reached up. "I can do it." I gave it to her and noticed my purple flower getting more smudged. And I told myself the first thing I was doing when I got home was letting Gia draw a new one. But then the little girl looked inside and frowned. "It's empty." My heart dropped, but I forced a smile and said, "That's okay. You did really good. You're helping us a lot." And her face lit up. But then she started coughing really hard, and her face went pale, and her little legs gave out. I caught her before she hit the floor, and we both slid down to the ground together. My heart was racing because she was getting sicker fast. "Just rest for a second, okay? I'm gonna stay right here with you." She rested her head against my arm and quietly said, "I want my bunny. He always makes me feel safe." I talked to distract her from the pain. "What's his name?" "Mr. Peanut," she said. And when I told her that was a silly name, she giggled, but it quickly turned into another cough and it worried me. But my worry got worse when I saw the countdown at 16 minutes. My stomach twisted because I needed to be certain searching for the antidote to get back to Gia, but I couldn't leave the little girl alone either. But that's when the doctor walked over to us. "There's nothing else in here. We have to check the other rooms." I pushed myself off the floor on shaky legs and lifted the little girl up to her feet, and we headed into the next room to keep searching. The pregnant woman was already in there opening cabinets, but she was struggling to bend down and check the lower ones because of her belly. So I told the little girl to start checking the drawers on the other side of the room, and then I walked over to the pregnant woman and told her, "I'll check the low ones. You can check the higher cabinets." She let out a relieved breath and said, "Thank you." I opened the lower cabinets and she checked the high ones while holding her belly, and I asked, "How far along are you?" She rubbed her belly. 7 months. I'm naming her Connie, after my mom. I told her, "That's a pretty name," and her eyes filled with tears. My mom's been sick for a while now, cancer, and this baby's the only thing keeping her holding on. If I don't make it out of here, she's never gonna get to meet her. I softly said, "Connie's lucky to have a mom like you," and she gave me a small smile. "Thank you. That means a lot." I felt a little happy that I could comfort her, and then we went back to searching. But we didn't find anything, and the countdown had dropped to 15 minutes, so we rushed to the next room. The big man stomped past us and started ripping every cabinet open, muttering, "Saturday. I can't miss Saturday. Saturday's his birthday. I got him a bike. I gotta be there." My heart broke for him because that's what he'd been muttering this whole time, and now I couldn't even be mad at him for fighting so hard for the antidote. The five of us started ripping through every drawer and cabinet because we all had someone waiting for us at home, and after a couple of minutes the little girl opened a cabinet in the back and pulled out a small glass vial, and she turned to everyone asking, "Is this the medicine?" My heart actually stopped for a second because that was our way out, but then I watched everyone's reactions to the vial and realized we all wanted it. The doctor tightened his jaw. The pregnant woman's hand went to her belly, determined to save her baby, and the big man's eyes locked onto that vial like nothing else in the room existed. That's when everyone moved at once. The doctor crouched down in front of the little girl with tears running down his face and held out his ring finger to her. "Sweetheart, look at my ring. It's pretty, right?" The little girl sniffled and nodded slowly. "It's really pretty." "Yeah, it is. My fiancée. She's really pretty too, and she's waiting for me. You want to help me get back to her, right? Just give me the medicine." I got so mad I grabbed him by the back of his scrubs and yanked him away from her, yelling, "Are you seriously manipulating a little girl right now?" We stumbled back, and the pregnant woman immediately rushed at the little girl from the other side, sobbing, "I'm sorry, sweetheart. My mommy's been waiting her whole life to meet my baby, so I can't die here." I let go of the doctor and shoved her away from the little girl. "Stop it. She's a child. Are you all out of your minds?" And that's when the big man stepped forward, his face wet with tears. My body filled with dread when he roared, "I told you that antidote was mine," and charged straight for us. I threw myself in front of the little girl to protect her, but the big man slammed into both of us so hard, we crashed back into the cabinets, and the vial flew straight out of her hand. Everything moved in slow motion, and I couldn't breathe because that was our only way out, and it was falling right under our noses. The doctor dove forward. The pregnant woman screamed and lunged with both hands out, and the big man stumbled trying to catch it, but the glass vial hit the concrete and shattered into 100 tiny pieces, and the clear liquid splattered across the floor. The room went dead silent, except for the sound of the countdown ticking down to 11 minutes, and we all stood there frozen, staring at what we'd just done. My legs gave out, and I dropped to the floor devastated because I knew I was never seeing Gia again. Then the voice came over the speakers with a long, mocking laugh. "Oh, that was incredible. All that fighting just to break the only thing keeping you alive. Congratulations. You just killed each other." The big man dropped to his knees and just pulled a folded photo out of his wallet with shaking hands. I could see it was 2 little boys and a woman, and he muttered, "I'm not gonna be there Saturday, buddy. Daddy's not gonna make it." Seeing him cry made my chest ache, and then I saw the pregnant woman sink to the floor and pressed her hands against her belly and started talking to it. "Connie, baby, I'm so sorry. Mommy's so sorry. Grandma was gonna love you so much. She's been waiting for you her whole life." I had to look away from her because I couldn't watch a mother apologize to her baby for dying before she got to meet her. The doctor was also crying and playing with his engagement ring, whispering his fiancée's name over and over. The little girl tugged at my shirt, and tears were streaming down her face when she asked, "Are we gonna die?" I dropped down to my knees in front of her and pulled her into the tightest hug, sobbing hard, and I felt her little arms wrap around my neck and her braids pressed against the side of my face, and for a second it actually felt like I was hugging Gia goodbye. But then the little girl started coughing badly, and when I let go, there was blood all over her mouth, and the pregnant woman started moaning and clutching her stomach harder while the doctor collapsed onto his side, gasping for air. I clutched my heart because it felt like it was being squeezed, but I ignored the pain and crawled over to the puddle and stared at it because we were so close. I whispered, "I'm sorry, Gia. I'm so sorry," because in 9 minutes I would be dead and she wouldn't even know. But then I saw the vial's label and my heart happily skipped a beat because it said Antidote 1 of 2 in black ink. I got up and held up the wet piece of label. "Everyone get up. There's another antidote in here. Look." The doctor's voice came out hoarse. "That's just a label. It doesn't mean anything. Just give up." But the big man wiped blood off his lip and dragged himself upright, using the wall for support. "I'm not dying in here. My son's birthday is on Saturday. If there's a chance there's another way out, I'm taking it." The pregnant woman looked at him with a hint of courage she didn't have a second ago, and she pushed herself off the floor too. The doctor exhaled hard through his nose and also got up, muttering, "Fine, but if this is a wild goose chase, I swear to God." And he stumbled toward one of the 4 doorways without finishing the sentence. I helped the little girl up to her feet and she asked, "So I will go home to my mommy?" I nodded slowly and said yes, even though I didn't know if it was true, but I didn't want to break my promise to her. We all split up again to search rooms we hadn't searched yet, but my lungs felt like they were filling with something thick, and I had to stop every few steps to catch my breath. And then I checked the countdown again, and it was at 7 minutes, and I knew if we didn't find that second vial soon, we were all dying in here. But I continued to drag myself down the long, narrow hallway because Gia was waiting for me. At the end of the hallway was a small storage room with a glass vial and syringe sitting on a table in the back. My heart jumped in my chest because that was my way back to Gia, and I almost ran toward it. But that's when the big man stumbled in through a door on the other side of the room. He looked angry when he saw me, but then his eyes locked onto the table and his whole body went rigid, and I knew I had to act fast because we only had 5 minutes left. I held up my hands. "Don't do anything stupid. We promised we'd figure this out together." He shook his head with tears already in his eyes. "It's not stupid. I promised my boy I'd be there for his birthday." His shoulders dropped forward an inch, and I watched him so closely my eyes started to burn because I had no way of knowing when he was going to make a run for it. But a few seconds later, he lunged towards the table and I ran after him. I tackled him and we both dropped to the concrete floor. But even with the poison killing us both, he was still stronger, so he pushed me off and got up. He stumbled toward the table and grabbed the vial and the syringe, and I was going to get up, but that's when another wave of poison hit me, and my whole body went heavy and I couldn't move. Tears were streaming down my face as I watched him push the needle into the vial and with shaking hands fill the syringe with the antidote. Every part of me was begging my body to move because Gia couldn't lose me, but my body stayed still, so I shouted, "Please, I have a sister. She's only 7. She needs me." But he was already lifting the syringe over his thigh, sobbing, "I'm sorry, my boy needs his dad." I dug my nails into the concrete and forced myself off the floor screaming because I wasn't letting Gia lose her brother. I grabbed his leg and yanked as hard as I could. He crashed down, and I jumped on top of him to get the syringe from him. We got tangled up, and he was holding the syringe in his fist, trying to push it down into his own thigh, but I grabbed his wrist with both hands and tried to pull it back up. He was crying so hard he could barely get the words out. "Please, please, just let me go home, please!" I shouted back through my own tears. "I have a sister, I have a sister!" But then he plunged the syringe straight down between us, but we both stared at each other horrified, because when we looked down at our thighs, the needle was in my thigh and the antidote was in me. I got off him and took the syringe out of my thigh, feeling relieved because Gia wasn't losing me tonight. But when I looked at the big man, his eyes were filled with tears, and I instantly felt guilty. He slammed his fist into the concrete next to him hard enough to split his knuckles open, and then his voice came out broken. "Tell my boy I tried. Tell him his dad got him a bike for his birthday, and I tried to be there on Saturday." I told him I would because that was all I had left to give him, and then I pulled myself up using the table and stumbled toward the door. I entered the main room and everyone was already there sitting against the walls with blood on their mouths and gray skin. The countdown said we had 1 minute, but it didn't even matter anymore. The doctor rasped out, "Did you find it? Did you find another one?" And the pregnant woman stood up looking hopeful. The little girl looked at me with trusting eyes, and I had to look away from all of them, feeling ashamed, but I forced myself to look them in the eyes and said, "The big man accidentally injected me. The antidote's already inside me. I'm so sorry." The doctor's eyes widened in fear, and he let out a broken chuckle. "I'm not gonna make it to the wedding." The pregnant woman started talking to her baby again. "I'm sorry, Connie. I'm so sorry." The little girl walked up to me on shaky legs and grabbed my hand and looked up at me and quietly said, "It's okay. Gia needs you." I started sobbing because I didn't deserve her being okay with this, and then the big man stumbled in, dragging himself along the wall for support, and that's when the voice came back laughing hard. "Oh, that was the best one yet. You couldn't have written it better if you tried. Congratulations to our winner." My chest felt heavy because I didn't feel like a winner. But then 4 red sniper dots appeared on 4 foreheads. 1 on the doctor's forehead, the pregnant woman's, the big man's, and the little girl's. My breath got caught in my throat from the realization that the little girl was going to die, and then everything around me slowed down. I felt my legs push off the concrete before my brain caught up, and the air around me went thick like I was running through water. I could hear my own voice screaming from somewhere far away. "No, no, she's a kid, she's just a kid." But my body was moving too slow. The dot stayed on her forehead, and her little eyes were still looking up at me like she was waiting for an answer. I wasn't going to push her out of the way in time. I wasn't going to make it. But then I tackled her onto the floor as 4 gunshots cracked through the air at once. The doctor, the pregnant woman, and the big man's bodies dropped to the concrete floor, but I could hear the little girl breathing. I felt the air rush back into my lungs and I sobbed, "You're okay. Oh my God, you're okay. You're okay." But then she coughed again, and blood landed on me, and my face went pale because I forgot about the poison. Her little body started going limp in my arms, and I quickly sat down on the floor and cradled her in my lap. Hey, stay with me, okay? You're okay. Just stay with me." She looked up at me with her tired eyes and quietly said, "Can you tell me a bedtime story? My mommy tells me one whenever I'm scared." I was so devastated I couldn't find the words, but if this was Gia's, the little girl's last request, I had to try. So I took a shaky breath and said, "Once upon a time there was a brave little princess, and she lived in a castle with her stuffed bunny, and her bunny would protect her from any monsters that tried to get her." She smiled with blood on her teeth, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek so I wouldn't break down in front of her. She said, "Just like me and my bunny." I nodded and stared up at the ceiling because I was barely holding myself together. "Yeah, just like you and your bunny, and the princess was never scared because her bunny protected her, right?" I waited for her answer, and my pulse quickened when I didn't get one. It took everything in me to look down at her, and I saw her eyes were still looking up at me, but there was nothing behind them anymore. But I refused to believe it, and I shook her gently and asked about her bunny, but she didn't move, and I couldn't deny it after that. The little girl who held my hand and trusted me died in my arms. I gently closed her eyes and let out a broken sob, and I kept whispering, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," because I'd promised her she'd see her mommy, and I'd lied right to her face. I slammed my fist into the concrete and my bones cracked, but I didn't care. I looked up at the cameras and screamed, "She was a kid! She was just a kid! Why her? Why did you take her?" But no one answered me. That's when the countdown on the wall hit 0, and the door at the front of the room clicked open, allowing me to leave, but I couldn't let go of the little girl. I held her for as long as I could, but eventually I forced myself to lay her down gently on the floor. I gently brushed her braids out of her face one last time, and stood up with all the strength I had left. I fell into the wall, but I used everything to limp towards the light. But just as I stepped out, I heard the speaker. "Congratulations, Jackson. I'm glad it was you." My eyes widened because he knew my name this whole time, and none of this had been random. I felt my fists clench. He was still toying with me after he killed innocent people, but I heard, "There, someone's coming out." I looked up in shock and saw police cars and an ambulance lined up across the parking lot, and 2 officers were running up to me. One of them asked, "Sir, are you okay? Sir!" They grabbed me, yelling for medics. "Where are the others?" But my eyes filled with tears. "It's just me. I'm the only one." I saw his face go pale, but they rushed me over to the ambulance. "We need to hurry." They put me in the back of it, but that's when a woman walked up to me crying really hard. "Mister, my daughter was in there. Is she coming out?" I didn't know who she was talking about, but then my eyes widened when she pulled out a stuffed bunny from her purse. The same bunny the little girl kept asking for. "She gets scared easily, so I brought her bunny. She'll be right out, won't she?" I started sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe, and the mom instantly realized her daughter was dead, and she dropped to her knees, bawling her eyes out. Then a little boy behind her said, "Mommy, so Daddy's not gonna be at my birthday?" He heard everything, and my heart stopped when I saw 2 boys and their mom, the same ones from the big man's picture. His mom covered her mouth and started crying, and I forced my legs to walk over, but the medic yelled, "Sir, we need to get you to the hospital." But I kept walking because I had a promise to keep to the big man. I knelt down to them. "Your daddy wanted me to tell you something." They looked at me with curious eyes. "What did Daddy say?" "He got you guys a bike for your birthday on Saturday. He tried really hard to bring it home to you. He loved you 2 so much." They started crying, and their mom dropped down and pulled both of them into her chest, sobbing. "Sir, we have to go now." I stood back up with the guilt eating me alive, and that's when I heard it. "Jackson!" I turned around and my heart actually stopped. Gia was running to me, braids bouncing and tears on her face. I fell to my knees and held my arms open. She crashed into me and wrapped her little arms so tight around my neck I could barely breathe. But when I saw the smudged purple flower on my hand, I sobbed harder because I'd made it home and she was going to draw me a new one tomorrow. "Jackson, Jackson, I thought I lost you. Please, please, please don't leave me ever again. I'm here, Gia. I'm not going anywhere. I promise." After a while, I pulled back and looked at her face, and her braids were a mess, but it was her, my baby sister. I shakily whispered, "Let's go home," and grabbed her tiny hand, and we walked to the ambulance together. But as we climbed inside, I saw the big man's family and little girl's mom sobbing, squeezing her bunny. I realized I had survived the game, but I would never survive what it cost me. I shot out of bed when I heard my mute daughter Ren screaming her lungs out like someone was killing her. I ran out of my room and saw my oldest daughter Callie running down the hallway. It was quiet at 11:02 p.m. Daughter Callie running down the hallway looking just... I jolted awake when I heard a speaker crackle and daughter Callie running down the hallway looking just as terrified as me. When I opened Ren's room, she was sitting up in bed, pale-faced with tears streaming down her cheeks and her whole body trembling. We rushed to her and I pulled her into my chest while Callie rubbed her back. I asked, "What happened?" Ren's hands were shaking so badly she could barely sign, but I understood it. She saw a man standing in her doorway. I got goosebumps all over my body and I asked her, "Ren, is he still in the house?" She nodded fast and Callie let out a small cry. I stood up. "Callie, stay with your sister. I'm going to check the house. Lock the door." Callie nodded fast and stood up to lock the door behind me. "Be careful, Dad." I ran to the hallway closet and grabbed the baseball bat from the top shelf and gripped it tightly, prepared to kill the man in my house. I checked Callie's room, then the bathroom, the closet, the basement, and the garage, but found no one. Even the front door and every window on the first floor was locked. My heart pounded because there was no one here, so I didn't know what Ren saw. Callie unlocked Ren's room after I knocked, and Ren was sitting on the bed trembling, and I knew I had to reassure her she was safe. I sat on the edge of the bed and softly said, "Ren, he's not here anymore. You're safe, I promise." But Ren shook her head fast, like she didn't believe me, and I didn't know how to reassure her more until I looked at her lamp on the nightstand and got an idea. I flicked the lamp off and on and signed, "If you ever need me, you flick the lights 2 times and I'll come running to you no matter where I am." Ren's tears instantly stopped and she bounced on the bed excitedly at the system, making her forget all about the man in her doorway. She flicked the lamp twice and watched me with a big smile on her face. Then her eyes got big like she had an idea and she flicked it 6 times, then signed, "6 flicks means good night, Dad." I laughed and flicked it 4 times and told her, "4 flicks means good night." Ren giggled and she hugged me tight, and I asked her if she felt safe now, and she nodded. 2 years went by without Ren seeing the man in the doorway, but the flicker ritual we made up that night became ours. She'd flick the bathroom light because she scraped her knee, and flick her lamp because she'd thrown up in her sleep. And every night I flicked her bedroom light off and on 4 times, and she would flick her bedroom light 6 times. Things were so good, I thought the man in the doorway was the worst thing that would happen to our family until the day I got home from work and shouted Ren's name, expecting her to come running up to me like always. But she didn't, so I went to her room, but it was empty, as if she never came home from school. I tried not to worry and told myself she was probably playing in Callie's room, so I went to her room. But Callie was sitting alone on her bed, scrolling on her phone. My voice came out shaky when I asked, "Where's Ren?" Callie looked up from her phone and asked, "What do you mean? Didn't you pick her up from school?" I knew something was wrong, but tried to calm down by telling myself she was probably still at school. But when I called the school, the lady told me Ren got on the afternoon bus home. My phone slipped from my hand, and dread filled me as I realized something bad definitely happened to my daughter. I looked at Callie, trying hard not to look scared, but failing. She got on the bus, but she's not here. Callie was already standing up, eyes wide. "Dad, what does that mean?" I ran out to go to the bus stop and heard Callie running behind me. "Dad, I'm going with you." I told her, "No, stay here in case Ren comes back." But she ran out the front door and climbed into the passenger seat before I could stop her. I drove fast to the bus stop while telling myself Ren was sitting on the bench waiting for me, and this would all be a stupid mix-up we'd laugh about later. But when we got there, my heart nearly stopped because the bench was empty. Callie's breathing got fast and shallow, and we both got out and walked up the road in different directions, shouting, "Ren! Ren! Where are you?" But then Callie suddenly stopped calling her name, and I saw her staring down into the ditch with her hand covering her mouth. My legs felt like jelly as I walked over, not prepared for what I would see. My eyes widened when I saw Ren's bright pink backpack in the ditch. Callie let out a broken scream that I felt in my chest. I stumbled into the ditch and picked up Ren's backpack. Her lunchbox was in the grass a few feet away, and the True Moo I'd packed for her that morning was lying next to it. I knew in that moment that somebody had taken my daughter, and the first thing I thought of was that the man Ren saw in her doorway had come back for her. I tried not to spiral because Callie needed me not to spiral, so I called 911 with my hands trembling as I told the dispatcher everything while picturing Ren wherever she was right now and wondering if she was cold or scared or hurt. I hung up when she said a car was on the way and went up to Callie, who was crying and shaking. I squeezed her shoulder. "We're going to find her, Callie. We're not losing her." When the cop showed up, he looked around the area for 3 minutes, then said, "There's no signs of a struggle out here, Mr. Powell." I said, "That doesn't make sense." But he told me, "Most kids her age run away from home and come back in a day or two. Just go home and wait it out." I clenched my fists. "You don't understand. 2 years ago, she saw a man in her doorway. What if it's the same man?" The cop sighed like I was making things up and asked if I filed a report, but when I said no, he said, "No report means that's not a lead. Best I can do is put out an alert." I knew he was going to be useless and not do that, so I told Callie we had to go, and we both angrily walked back to the car. Back at home, me and Callie started making missing persons flyers. Callie was crying the entire time, but kept wiping her tears and saying, "I'm fine," before I even asked. I squeezed her hand and told her that we were going to find Ren because we had to. When midnight came, I told Callie to go to bed because we were going to hand out the flyers at 8 a.m. She nodded and went to her room while I went to Ren's. I flicked the bedroom light off and on 4 times to tell her goodnight and stood there waiting for her lamp to flick back 6 times, even though I knew nothing was coming. The next morning, Callie and I were out the house putting up flyers on every telephone pole when our neighbor Mr. Reeve came up to us. We never really spoke, so it surprised me when he told me, "Silas, I heard what happened to poor Ren. I'm not letting you do this by yourselves. Tell me what you need." I stood there amazed because he was offering more help than the cop had. I handed him half the stack of flyers and he looked at Callie and his voice cracked when he said, "Callie, sweetheart, we're going to find Ren." Callie just nodded, and then Mr. Reeve walked off in the opposite direction, and I felt more hopeful than I had all night. We worked until we ran out of flyers, and Mr. Reeve told us, "I got every porch and every telephone pole between here and the school. I also told the guy at the gas station to look at his cameras for yesterday afternoon." I pulled him into a hug before I even knew I was doing it. "Thank you for your help." He patted my back. "Silas, I don't have kids of my own, but I'd want somebody to help me if I were in your shoes." He took his phone out and told me to save his number so I could call him whenever I needed something. I saved it with shaking hands, and my voice cracked when I said I didn't know how to thank him. He rubbed his neck and asked, "Could I see Ren's room for a minute? I know that probably sounds strange, but I want to pray over it." It did sound strange, but he spent the whole morning helping, so I nodded. Callie whipped her head at me and through gritted teeth said, "Dad, what are you doing?" I shook her off and said he was being polite. I walked past her and led him upstairs. He looked at the bed and the lamp on the nightstand and the stuffed rabbit on the pillow and the pink walls. Then he closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, and when he was done, he told me again that we were going to find Ren. I thanked him and walked him out. Callie was in the living room now with her arms crossed tight and face pale. "Dad, that was so creepy." I couldn't believe what she was saying. "Cal, he was just praying." She scrunched up her face. "I don't care. I don't want him in our house again." I reminded her that he was the only one helping us, and she stormed off angrily and slammed her door. I went back up to Ren's room and flicked the bedroom light off and on 4 times and still stayed there waiting for her lamp to flick back. But that's when I noticed I could see into Reeve's living room, and his overhead bulb was flickering on and off. My throat closed up because it felt like Ren was talking to me, but I knew it wasn't her. The next morning, Mr. Reeve knocked on my door holding a foil tray. "I made you guys breakfast burritos. Food is probably the last thing on your mind." I let him in, and he set the tray on the counter, and that's when Callie came down the stairs. She froze when she saw him, but Mr. Reeve happily handed her a plate with a burrito. She took it without a word and sat at the kitchen table but didn't touch the food. Reeve sat across from me, and his eyes were as tired as mine. "Silas, there's something I have to tell you." I gestured for him to continue. "Do you know the man that lives in the brown house with the chain-link fence?" When I nodded, Reeve said, "I don't want to point fingers, Silas, but he has a history with kids. He could be a suspect." Callie was already standing up, and I was grabbing my keys off the counter, and we all ran outside. Callie and me got in the car while Reeve watched us from our driveway. When we got to the Brown house, I saw a white van in the driveway and the blinds were closed. I got an unsettling feeling in my stomach, and it made me think this was the man Ren saw in her doorway 2 years ago, and he'd come back to finish what he started. I unbuckled my seatbelt, and Callie unbuckled hers, but I grabbed her wrist. "Stay in the truck." She tried to pull her arm back. "No, Dad. What if he took her? That's why you need to stay in the car." I got out the car and walked up the porch, hearing my own pulse in my ears. When I knocked, a man in his 50s opened the door, and he looked annoyed at being interrupted. "Yeah?" he said. Really annoyed, and that pissed me off. My voice came out cold. "Where is she?" He looked confused. "Where is who?" "My daughter, 9 years old, mute, missing. I know you took her." He stood up straight, menacingly towering over me. "I don't have your daughter. Now get off my property." But I wasn't intimidated and looked past him into his house, and that's when I saw a bright pink backpack that looked just like Ren's. My vision blurred, and I grabbed him by the shirt and slammed him into the doorframe. "Where is she?" he struggled out. "I don't know." I didn't believe him and punched him in the face, and he dropped to the floor, but I continued hitting him. My knuckles were splitting open on his face, but I didn't care. "Where is she? Where is my daughter?" That's when I heard sirens, and a cop quickly pulled me off him and slammed me against the porch railing. "Sir, you need to calm down right now," I screamed. "He has my daughter. Check the house. I saw her backpack on his counter." The other cop was helping the man up, and he was spitting blood and shaking his head and talking fast. The cop let go of me while his partner walked over. "Sir, he's got an alibi. He was at work the day your daughter went missing." "He's lying. Call his manager." The cop sighed and told the man to call his manager, and he put her on speakerphone. The cop explained everything to her, and my face crumbled when the manager said, "I can confirm he was here on that day." I shook my head rapidly and felt my head spinning. "No, he's lying, I know it. I saw her backpack on his counter." The cop sighed and asked the man if he could show me the backpack, and when I saw it, I realized they were 2 completely different bags. I closed my eyes and my legs almost gave out because I was still nowhere near finding Ren. "He's not pressing charges, but if you come within 100 feet of this house again, you're going to jail. You understand me?" I nodded weakly, then walked off the porch. When I got in my car, Callie looked scared of me, but then regained her composure and said, "Dad, you can't do that again. If you go to jail, Ren doesn't have anybody." I swallowed hard, suddenly feeling guilty, and drove us home in silence. When I pulled into the driveway, Reeve was at my window in seconds, and he covered his mouth when he saw my hands. "Silas,